You're overreacting, Linda. It's just money. That's what my husband Mark said while packing a weekend bag, using the same duffel I'd bought him for our 25th anniversary. He said it so calmly, like he hadn't just drained our retirement savings account. Like he hadn't just turned my entire future into dust. I stood by the doorway of our home in Austin, Texas, frozen. The air smelled like burnt coffee and the lies I'd ignored for months. Just money, I whispered. That's 30 years of my work. My overtime. My 401k. Our retirement plan. Mark rolled his eyes. You act like I blew it at a casino. It's an investment. He walked past me to grab his car keys. That set of keys used to represent our shared life, home, car, security. Now they just jingled like chains cutting me free. I followed him onto the porch. Investment in what, Mark? Her lip fillers? Her business in Florida? He froze but didn't turn around. That's how I knew I was right. Her name was Brenda, 30 years old, fake tan, and a voice that sounded like a permanent whine. The wind was cold that night, but my body was burning inside. You always had to control everything, he said finally. Maybe if you weren't so bitter, I would have stayed. And with that, he got into his truck and drove away. The taillights blurred through my tears until the street was silent again. Flashback, the price of trust. I met Mark when I was 22, working as a bank teller. He was charming, older, and talked about building a future together. I believed him so completely that I let him handle our finances after we married. I worked extra hours so he could start his construction business. I didn't buy new clothes, skipped vacations, and kept every receipt like a soldier collecting proof of sacrifice. We made it through 2 kids, a mortgage, and the recession. By the time I hit 45, I thought we were safe. We had $210,000 in retirement savings and a plan to move to Tennessee to open a small coffee shop. Now half of that was gone. No, stolen. When I called the bank the next morning, the officer confirmed it. Mark had transferred $108,000 to a joint business account. The second name on that account was Brenda Carter. I felt like someone had kicked me in the chest. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold the phone. The silence after. The house was too quiet without him, but also peaceful in a way I hadn't felt in years. No TV blaring, no beer cans on the counter, no snide remarks about my boring office job. I sat in the living room, holding our wedding album on my lap. Every photo felt like a lie I'd been too proud to see. For 3 days, I didn't eat much, didn't sleep, didn't answer calls. But on the 4th day, I looked in the mirror and saw a woman I didn't recognize, tired, yes, but still standing. Something in me snapped back into place. I was done being the victim. The next morning, I drove to a law office downtown. The receptionist looked at me with pity when I said I wanted a consultation for financial theft and divorce. My lawyer, Rachel Hughes, was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair and eyes that didn't blink often. Let me guess, she said. He took your money and called it an investment. I nodded. Tears started again. Well, she said, sliding a pad of paper across the desk. Then we start calling it what it is, fraud. That word, fraud, was like oxygen after weeks of drowning. For the first time in months, I felt hope. Rachel told me to freeze all remaining joint accounts and to open one in my own name. She promised to file the divorce and a petition for asset recovery within 48 hours. As I left her office, I saw my reflection in the glass door. This time I did recognize that woman. She was tough. She was awake. And she was done being controlled. The day after meeting my lawyer, I was sitting at my kitchen table surrounded by paperwork, bank statements, tax returns, and copies of transfers that proved Mark had been funneling money to Brenda's business. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You should have treated him better, Linda. He finally has someone who appreciates him. I stared at it for a full minute, my pulse thudding in my ears. The profile picture was a tanned face, pouting in oversized sunglasses. Brenda. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I laughed, one of those shaky, almost hysterical laughs that come when you're past the point of breaking. Then I took a screenshot and emailed it to Rachel. Evidence. How he'd been planning it. As I went through our bank records, patterns started forming. He'd been transferring money for months, $2,000 here, $5,000 there. Always labeling it contractor payments or project expenses. But here's the thing, Mark hadn't had a major project since the spring. He'd been pretending to work while taking trips to Florida to meet investors. And me? I'd been too busy doing my job at the credit union, trusting him like a fool. I remembered how he'd once said, You don't need to understand business, Linda. That's my job. Now I realized he'd been building a life without me, using the money I earned. The visit. That weekend, my daughter, Amanda, drove down from Dallas. She was 23, newly engaged, and full of that optimism I used to have. When I told her what happened, she covered her mouth, eyes wide. "Mom, he took your retirement?" I nodded. She sat across from me, silent for a minute, then said something that stayed with me. "Then let's make sure he never spends a cent of it again." She helped me gather every document, even old receipts from our safe. We made a timeline, highlighted suspicious charges, and wrote down every date he traveled. Amanda worked in digital marketing, so she also did something I wouldn't have thought of. She checked Brenda's social media. It was like watching a movie about my own humiliation. Photos of tropical vacations, champagne bottles, hotel pools, and one caption that hit me in the gut. "Finally living my best life with my man. He treats me like a queen." Posted 1 week after Mark cleaned out our savings. Facing him. I didn't tell him I knew everything yet. Rachel advised me to act normal until we had all the legal groundwork ready. But 2 nights later, he showed up. No warning. Just the sound of his truck pulling into the driveway like nothing had happened. He walked in with that same fake confidence, holding a grocery bag. "I brought dinner," he said. "Thought maybe we could talk like adults." I stared at him. He looked thinner, somehow older. Maybe guilt was catching up. Or maybe Brenda's queen act wasn't cheap to maintain. "Sure," I said, sitting down. My voice calm, my heart racing. He unpacked the food like this was any other night. Pasta, garlic bread, wine. Then he started his little speech. "I know things got heated, but I think we can fix this. I'll get the money back. Eventually." "Eventually?" I repeated. "You mean when you're done funding your girlfriend's tan salon?" He froze. His fork clattered onto the plate. I slid a folder across the table, bank statements, screenshots, photos. "I know everything, Mark." For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then, in that same cold tone I'd once mistaken for composure, he said, "You're not going to ruin my life over a mistake." I stood up. "No, Mark. You already did that yourself." Then I walked away, for the first time, without looking back. The lawyer's plan. The next morning, Rachel called. She'd filed the emergency injunction. That meant he couldn't move or withdraw funds until the court reviewed the case. She also found something shocking. The so-called business Brenda had registered in Florida wasn't even real. No license. No location. Nothing. It was a fake company name, BC Consulting LLC, used only to open the joint account. That meant they were both legally exposed. Rachel smiled when she told me, "If he's stupid enough to lie on financial documents, we'll get everything back, maybe more." For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. Reflection. I realized something that night. When a man like Mark betrays you, he doesn't just take your money. He takes your confidence, your sense of safety, your belief in fairness. But once you start fighting back, once you stand up and say, "Enough," you begin to take all of it back piece by piece. I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry, yes, but focused. And that's a dangerous thing, not for me, but for him. Because I was done crying. Now I was planning. The next few weeks were a blur of documents, calls, and quiet determination. Every morning, I'd brew coffee, sit at the kitchen table, and go through one file at a time. I wasn't just trying to recover my money anymore. I was reclaiming my life. Rachel called it building leverage. I called it therapy. Each receipt, each transfer, each signed check was a piece of evidence proving who Mark really was. And soon a defendant. The call from the bank. One Monday morning, I received a call from the bank's fraud department. The man on the other end spoke carefully, like he didn't want to upset me. "Mrs. Collins, we've completed our review. Some of the funds from the joint account appear to have been used for personal luxury items. A trip to Miami, jewelry, a car lease under Ms. Carter's name." I gripped the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. He continued, "Since your name wasn't on that account, you may qualify to recover partial funds through our fraud protection process." It wasn't everything, but it was something. After I hung up, I whispered to myself, "You picked the wrong woman, Mark." Brenda's little mistake. Amanda had been keeping tabs on Brenda's social media. One night, she sent me a screenshot with a laughing emoji. It was a photo of Brenda holding a new Lexus key fob. Caption: "He said I deserve the world." I zoomed in. The dealership name was visible on the tag. Amanda said, "Mom, that's proof he used your money for that car. You can subpoena the dealership." I forwarded it to Rachel immediately. She called back 10 minutes later, sounding almost excited. This is gold. We'll include it in the amended claim. Keep digging. And just like that, every taunting post Brenda made became another nail in their legal coffin. The encounter. 2 weeks later, I ran into Mark, accidentally, or maybe not. He showed up at the credit union where I worked, pretending to be there for loan information. The second I saw him, I felt my pulse jump. He looked nervous, like someone who knows his world is crumbling. He approached my desk. Linda, can we talk? I didn't look up. This is a place of business, Mark. You can talk to my lawyer. He lowered his voice. You don't have to do this. We can settle it privately. That word, privately, made my skin crawl. That's what he'd always said when he didn't want people to see the truth. Privately is what got us here, I said, finally meeting his eyes. You didn't care about privacy when you emptied our account. People were watching now. He shifted uncomfortably. Don't make a scene, he hissed. I smiled. Oh, don't worry. The real scene is coming, in court. He left, red-faced. And I felt something I hadn't in months, power. Preparing for battle. Rachel warned me. He'll try to intimidate you before the hearing. Maybe even manipulate you emotionally. Be ready. She was right. Over the next few days, I started getting messages again, this time from an unknown number. You're ruining his life. He just made a mistake. Why can't you forgive him? You'll never win anyway. At first, they rattled me. But then I realized something. No one sends messages like that unless they're scared. So, I kept every one of them. Another folder. Another set of screenshots. Finding my strength. I started going for walks every evening. It became my ritual, to clear my head, breathe, and remind myself that I was still here. Sometimes I'd pass couples holding hands and feel a pang of loss. But mostly I felt free. No more tiptoeing around moods. No more apologizing for wanting security. No more shrinking myself to make someone else comfortable. I even started attending a local women's support group on Thursdays. There were women like me, betrayed, broken, but rebuilding. One of them said something that stuck with me. Revenge isn't about hurting them. It's about proving you can live without them better. That line became my mantra. The day before the hearing, I laid out my outfit, navy suit, pearl earrings, hair tied back. Professional. Calm. In control. Mark would probably show up smug and unprepared. Brenda might be there too, pretending to be innocent. But I had truth on my side. And paper trails don't lie. I sat at my desk that night, staring at the thick binder of evidence. It wasn't just legal proof. It was a record of every time I doubted myself but kept going. Then I closed it, turned off the light, and whispered, "Tomorrow it begins." The courthouse smelled like old paper and coffee. I sat on the wooden bench outside the courtroom, my hands clutching that thick binder of evidence like it was my lifeline. Rachel sat beside me, calm as ever, flipping through her notes. "You've done everything right," she said softly. "Just tell the truth. That's all we need." Mark walked in a few minutes later. He wore a gray suit I'd bought him 2 years ago for our son's graduation. Funny how even that felt stolen now. Brenda trailed behind him, trying to look polished, but she was clearly out of her depth, tugging at her too-tight blazer, chewing gum. Mark glanced at me once. No smile. Just that same arrogance that had once convinced me he was confident instead of selfish. Opening statements. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s, took her seat and asked us to rise. When Rachel began to speak, her voice was steady and sharp. "Your Honor, my client entrusted her husband of 25 years with full access to their joint and retirement accounts. Over several months, he secretly transferred over $100,000 to fund another woman's lifestyle under the guise of a fake business." Mark's attorney interrupted with the usual nonsense: miscommunication, emotional distress, joint marital decisions. But Rachel wasn't having it. She opened our binder and began placing documents in front of the judge, one by one. Bank statements, transfers, social media posts, receipts, fraudulent business registration. It's all here. The courtroom went quiet except for the sound of pages turning. When Brenda spoke, the judge asked Brenda to stand. Her voice trembled, but she tried to play innocent. "I didn't know he was married," she said. "He told me they were separated. The money was for our business idea." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Is that why you used it to lease a Lexus and take 3 vacations?" Brenda's face turned red. "That was a gift." Rachel smiled slightly. "Then I'm sure you won't mind showing proof of income for your so-called business." Silence. The judge looked unimpressed. "Ms. Carter, you may sit down." I looked straight at Brenda. For years, I'd been the quiet, obedient wife. But right then, I wanted her to see what strength looked like. She looked away first. Mark's defense. When it was Mark's turn, he did what he always did, lied confidently. "I made mistakes, Your Honor. But I never intended to hurt Linda. I just needed a change. Things between us were dead. I thought she'd understand." He looked at me like he expected sympathy. I stared back, expressionless. "I understood plenty, Mark. I just didn't know I married a con artist." The judge held up her hand. "Let's keep it civil." Rachel leaned toward me and whispered. That hit harder than anything I could have said. The moment of truth. Then came the evidence review. Rachel played a short video, Brenda's social media post showing the Lexus key, with the caption about her man. The judge sighed. "Mr. Collins, did you use funds from your wife's account to purchase this vehicle?" Mark stammered. "Technically, it came from a business account. An account your wife's funds were transferred into?" He hesitated. "Yes." And just like that, his whole defense fell apart. Judgment. By the end of the session, the judge's patience had evaporated. "I've seen many forms of financial deceit, Mr. Collins," she said, voice cold. "But few as deliberate as yours. You took advantage of your wife's trust and diverted funds for personal gain. I'm ordering a full restitution of $108,000, plus damages and attorney fees. The vehicle in question will be seized and liquidated toward repayment." Brenda gasped. Mark just stared at the floor. I sat still. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from relief. It was over. Almost. After the verdict. Outside the courtroom, Mark tried to approach me. "Linda, wait. We can talk." I turned to him, voice calm but sharp. "You talked enough when you lied. We're done." He opened his mouth to speak again, but I held up my hand. "You don't get to take anything else from me. Not my time, not my peace." He didn't follow. Maybe for the first time, he knew he couldn't. Rachel walked beside me to the parking lot. "You handled yourself perfectly," she said. "Most women fall apart in there. You didn't." "I already did that months ago," I said. "Now I'm just rebuilding." The first breath of freedom. That evening, I sat alone on my porch, the same spot where he'd once driven away. But this time, the silence felt peaceful, not hollow. I thought about all the years I'd spent planning a future with someone who never really planned one with me. Now I realized I could still have that future, just without him. I sipped my tea and whispered to the night. "You said it was just money, Mark. Turns out, it was my freedom fund." For the first time in a long time, I smiled. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. The light was soft through the curtains, and for a moment, I didn't feel like a woman who'd been betrayed. I felt like someone with a second chance. I made coffee, sat by the window, and looked at the small stack of papers Rachel had left me. The finalized divorce decree and the restitution order. It was official. He had to pay every cent back within 6 months, or the court would seize his remaining assets. There was no celebration, just quiet relief. Peace doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with silence. A week later, Amanda came over with a box of pastries and said, "Mom, we should do something with this new chapter. You can't just go back to how things were." I smiled. I don't even know who I am without being someone's wife. She leaned in. "Then let's find out." That night, I opened my laptop and looked through old dreams I'd written down years ago. One stood out. Open a coffee shop after retirement. Back then, it was our dream. Now, it could be mine alone. I started small. I called it Second Cup Cafe. The name felt right. A second chance, a second beginning. I used what savings I had left after legal fees and applied for a small business grant for women entrepreneurs. I thought they'd never approve it, but 2 months later they did. The first time I walked into the little shop space I rented, the air smelled of dust and fresh paint. The walls were bare, but to me they were full of possibilities. I ran my fingers along the counter, imagining it lined with coffee mugs and pastries. Every day I learned something new: how to order beans in bulk, how to manage inventory, how to design a logo. I was scared, but I was alive again. Then one evening while closing up, I saw him. Mark. Standing across the street, hands in his pockets, looking smaller than I remembered. He didn't come inside. Just watched for a while, then walked away. I didn't flinch. I didn't hide. I just locked the door and flipped the sign to closed. That moment felt symbolic, the past finally shutting itself out. Months went by. The cafe slowly became a neighborhood favorite. Regulars started calling me Miss Linda. And sometimes I'd overhear people say things like, "You can feel the heart in this place." One day, a woman in her 50s came in, eyes red from crying. She told me her husband had left her after 30 years. She didn't want coffee, just someone to talk to. I sat with her for an hour. By the time she left, she was smiling a little. That's when I realized this cafe wasn't just for me. It was for women like us. The ones who'd lost everything but still had themselves. 6 months later, Rachel called to tell me Mark had completed his repayments. I thanked her, closed my eyes, and whispered a quiet thank you to the universe. I didn't want the money anymore. I wanted what it represented, closure. That night, I opened the small lockbox where I'd kept his old wedding ring after the divorce. I took it out, looked at it one last time, then dropped it into the donation jar by the register labeled Women Rising Fund. It clinked softly against the coins. A small sound, but it echoed through me. When I got home, I looked in the mirror, really looked. I saw silver strands in my hair, laugh lines around my eyes, and strength where there used to be fear. Mark once told me no one would want a woman my age if I ever left him. I smiled at the memory, not out of sadness but victory. Because he was wrong. I didn't need anyone to want me. I just needed to want myself again. If you were me, what would you have done? Comment below. Life after the court case felt strange at first. There were no more phone calls, no more messages, no more arguments echoing through the house. Just quiet. And I learned that quiet isn't lonely, it's healing. I started waking up earlier each morning, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I'd open the curtains, make coffee, and stand in that golden light that used to make me sad. Now it reminded me I was still here, still standing. Amanda would call almost every evening. "You sound happier, Mom," she'd say. And I was. Even if happiness didn't look the way I'd imagined it would. It was smaller, simpler, like buying fresh flowers on a Tuesday or fixing the leaky faucet myself instead of waiting for someone else to do it. The cafe kept growing. Word spread fast, especially among women. Some came in for coffee, some just for company. I'd see them glance around the shop, at the warm lights, the cozy chairs, and then they'd tell me their stories. Divorce, betrayal, new beginnings. Each one felt familiar. Each one reminded me that strength comes in waves, not all at once. Sometimes men came in too, polite and curious. One of them, Daniel, started stopping by more often. He was a retired teacher, always with a book in hand and a kind smile. We talked about everything, music, life, how hard it is to start over after 50. He never asked about my past, and I never asked about his. One evening he said, "You know, you have a calm about you that most people never find." I laughed. "It's called survival." He smiled back. "Then survival looks good on you." I didn't know where it would go, and I didn't need to. It wasn't about finding love again. It was about realizing I hadn't run out of life yet. A few months later, on the anniversary of my court hearing, I closed the cafe early and drove to the lake outside town. I sat by the water, watching the reflection of the setting sun ripple across the surface. The same lake where Mark once promised we'd grow old together. I took off my shoes, let the cold water touch my feet, and whispered, "Thank you for leaving." Because if he hadn't, I'd still be waiting for someone else to save me. When I got home that night, I looked in the mirror again. Not to check how I looked, but to remind myself how far I'd come. The woman staring back wasn't bitter. She was calm, strong, whole. Mark's betrayal had once felt like the end of everything. But now it felt like the beginning of me. A year passed, and sometimes it still amazed me how completely my life had changed. The woman who once cried over empty accounts now owned a place where people came to fill their hearts. The cafe had grown into a little community, college students studying in the corners, old friends laughing over muffins, single mothers finding a moment of peace before picking up their kids. I'd stand behind the counter and just watch them, grateful that pain could somehow turn into purpose. One afternoon, Amanda walked in with a framed sign she'd made herself. It read, "Strong women build stronger worlds." She hung it right above the door, so it was the first thing anyone saw when they walked in and the last thing they saw when they left. I stared at it for a long time. That sentence summed up everything I'd been through. Every tear, every loss, every moment I thought I couldn't survive. I'd learned that freedom isn't loud. It's in the small things, owning your choices, paying your own bills, trusting your gut, and walking away without explaining yourself. It's in saying no without guilt and yes without fear. One morning, I received a letter. It was from Mark. Just seeing his handwriting made my chest tighten, but I opened it anyway. He wrote that he was sorry, that Brenda had left him, that he'd lost his house, that he was trying to get his life back. He said he missed me. I folded the letter neatly, placed it in a drawer, and never replied. Not out of hate, out of peace. Some chapters deserve to end quietly. Weeks later, I started hosting women's evenings at the cafe once a month. We'd talk, share stories, laugh, cry, and remind each other that survival is a kind of art. One night, as I locked up after everyone left, I saw my reflection in the glass door. I barely recognized the woman looking back. Her shoulders straight, her eyes clear, her mouth relaxed. I whispered to her, "You did it." Outside, the street was empty, but I didn't feel alone. I turned off the lights, slid the key into my pocket, and walked to my car under the quiet hum of the city. The world felt wide again, like it was offering me something instead of taking it away. They say life after betrayal is harder. They're wrong. It's just more honest. You see things for what they are, and for once, you choose yourself. It's been 3 years since that day in court, and sometimes I still wake up wondering how I ever survived it all. Then I look around and realize, I didn't just survive, I rebuilt. The cafe now has 2 branches, both small but full of warmth. People tell me it feels like a hug in a cup. I like that. Amanda helps me manage the business side now. She handles the social media, and every once in a while she posts an old photo of me behind the counter with a caption like, "The woman who turned betrayal into a brand." I always blush when I see those, but deep down I'm proud. Mark never showed his face again. I heard through a mutual friend that he moved out of state, tried starting another business, and failed. I don't wish him harm. I just don't wish him anything at all. He's a ghost I finally stopped feeding. Brenda tried reaching out once, too. She sent an email that began with, "I think we both suffered because of him." I deleted it without finishing the sentence. She chose her suffering. I chose freedom. Last month, Daniel, the retired teacher, told me he was moving to Oregon to be near his grandkids. Before he left, he stopped by the cafe with a bouquet of tulips and said, "You've become the kind of woman other women talk about when they say, 'If she can do it, so can I.'" Then he hugged me goodbye. It wasn't romantic. It was kind. It was closure, the healthy kind. Some nights, I stay late after closing and just sit by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the streetlights flicker. I think about all the versions of myself I've been, the hopeful newlywed, the exhausted worker, the broken wife, the quiet fighter, and now, this woman who owns her peace. Sometimes customers ask about the story behind the name Second Cup Cafe. I smile and say, because sometimes life doesn't pour right the first time. They always laugh, but I mean it. Life doesn't always work out the way you planned. But if you're brave enough to start again, it might end up better. Before I close each night, I walk to the door and look at the sign Amanda made. Strong women build stronger worlds. I touch the frame gently, turn the key, and listen to the click of the lock. That sound used to mean being shut in. Now it means I'm safe, and everything inside belongs to me. It was the second spring after the divorce when I realized I had stopped waiting for closure. It had already happened quietly, somewhere between signing the last court document and unlocking the cafe every morning. Healing doesn't arrive with a big announcement. It just sneaks in one day when you notice you haven't thought about him for weeks. Business was steady, but more than that, life was steady. Amanda had taken on more responsibility, and I finally hired 2 young baristas, both single moms looking for a fresh start. Watching them laugh behind the counter reminded me why I'd built this place. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was a space where women could breathe, even if only for a few minutes. One rainy afternoon, I was cleaning tables when a familiar car slowed down outside. My heart skipped, and for a second, I thought it was Mark. But the truck kept going, splashing through puddles, and disappeared. I stood there with the rag in my hand, smiling at myself. The old me would have panicked. The new me just kept wiping the table. That was growth, simple, quiet, solid. Later that night, I sat with Amanda going over our month's earnings. She looked up from her laptop and said, "Mom, you know you could open another location if you wanted to." I laughed. One step at a time. I used to dream about retiring. Now I'm finally living. After she left, I sat alone for a while, listening to the hum of the fridge and the ticking of the wall clock. The sound used to make me anxious, like time was slipping away. Now it sounded peaceful. Around closing time, a woman came in drenched from the rain. She said she was driving through town and saw the sign, Second Cup Cafe. She ordered tea and, after a long pause, asked, "How did you come up with the name?" I told her, "Because sometimes life doesn't pour right the first time." She smiled, tears welling up. "That's exactly how I feel right now." We talked until closing. Before she left, she said, "Thank you for reminding me it's not too late." I locked the door after she left and leaned against it, feeling the weight of her words. Not too late. That's what this cafe really was. A reminder that starting over isn't failure, it's courage. That night, I lit a candle by the window, something I hadn't done since before the divorce. I didn't need it for light. I just wanted to honor the woman I'd become, the one who faced ruin and built peace out of its ashes. I wasn't angry anymore. Not even sad. I was free, and for the first time in decades, that word didn't scare me. It's funny how time softens even the sharpest memories. When I think of that night Mark walked out with my future in his hands, it doesn't sting anymore. It feels like watching an old movie I've already seen. Painful once, but distant now. I can even breathe through the parts that used to choke me. The cafe has become more than a business. It's a symbol. Women come here after work, after heartbreak, after long days. Some of them stay for hours just to sit and breathe. I keep a jar by the counter labeled Start Over Fund. Every month, I donate what's inside to a local shelter for women getting back on their feet. It's not much, but it feels right. Amanda jokes that I've turned my pain into a brand. Maybe she's right. I used to think revenge meant making him pay. Now I know it means living so well that he becomes irrelevant. Last week, I got invited to speak at a community event about financial independence for women. I almost said no, public speaking isn't my thing, but Amanda pushed me. So I went. Standing on that stage, I looked at the faces in front of me. Women of all ages, some broken, some brave, some both. And I told them everything. How I trusted the wrong man, how I lost everything, and how I got it back piece by piece. When I finished, there was silence. Then applause. Real, warm, honest applause that made my eyes sting. A few women came up afterward to hug me. One whispered, "You made me believe I can leave." That one sentence made every sleepless night worth it. Now, in the evenings, when I close up, I sometimes catch my reflection in the glass door. I see lines around my mouth from years of holding back tears, but I also see light in my eyes that wasn't there before. The kind that comes from knowing you faced the worst and came out stronger. I still wear the same silver bracelet Mark gave me years ago, not because I miss him, but because it reminds me how much I've changed. Once it was a symbol of belonging. Now it's a reminder of survival. Before locking up tonight, I whispered the same words I said on the day I started over. "You said it was just money, Mark. Turns out, it bought me freedom." Then I turned off the lights, pocketed the keys, and walked out under the soft glow of the streetlights, calm and unshaken.